It is so nice to see so many of you today, especially so many old friends, not necessarily chronologically old, but good friends. Can you all hear me? Oh, good. I'm going to talk for about 45, 50 minutes and take about 10 minutes of questions. And what I hope is that what I have to say to you today will stimulate conversations among you all. And I'm happy to join in any of those conversations as you would like me to do that as time goes on. So again, thank you, Cindy, for inviting me. And I want to personally thank the whole team of Judson. I know that sometimes we all can be critical. It's in our nature. But you know, this is one of the finest CCRCs in the country. It's my honor to serve as a trustee here. I will publicly say Judson is already in Emily's and my estate plans, and I encourage you to do the same thing. So, as many of you know, I retired after nearly 2 decades as Dean of Trinity Cathedral. I've been an Episcopal priest for over 30 years. I was a pastor who could see you twice a year and remember to ask after your mother. But now I might not recognize your face, and I probably won't recall your name. I was an executive who is no longer able to plan, organize, and execute projects. I am a writer and a public speaker who literally runs out of words at the end of the day. I'm a photographer who can't manage the settings on my camera. I'm a guitarist who can't remember the chords to familiar songs. I'm a sailor who's forgotten my knots, and a golfer who can't recall where my ball just landed. I'm a cyclist who loses my balance, and a hiker who now walks with a tentative stride. I'm a reader who struggles to remember what I've just read, a seasoned traveler who gets anxious in airports and hotels, a foodie who has trouble ordering from a menu, and an extrovert who gets overwhelmed at parties. Now, if in your late 70s, 80s, or 90s, you might say, well, I have trouble doing those things as well. But I'm 63 years old. I have frontotemporal dementia. And I want to tell you about my story and the lessons that I'm learning and the gifts that I'm receiving and the grace that I'm discovering. And I want to hear your stories as well. People often ask me what made me think I had dementia. Well, first of all, it runs in my family. My mother, 2 aunts, 1 uncle, and my maternal grandfather all died with dementia. I've had parishioners with dementia, and serving here on the board of Judson has allowed me to learn about the struggles in memory care, the best practices in memory care, and the potential in memory care. So you might say I can recognize the signs and symptoms. About 3 years ago, I began to notice some cognitive changes. At first, I thought it was just the normal aging process. And having just lost my mother, I thought that perhaps I was one of the worried well. But one day, in the spring of 2016, while washing my hands in a public restroom with nobody else there, I looked in the mirror and I didn't recognize my own face. And it galvanized me into making an appointment with a neurologist at the Cleveland Clinic. What followed was a lot of tests, a spinal tap, and an MRI ruled out early onset Alzheimer's. Both I and Emily and the doctor were relieved, and frankly, he was surprised. But the relief didn't last long. Following several weeks of speech therapy and a series of those neuropsych exams, on election day of 2016, I was diagnosed with FTD, Frontotemporal Degeneration. It's a disease that progressively shrinks the temporal and frontal lobes of the brain, resulting in a persistent decline in language, mobility, behavior, executive function, that's the ability to organize, and short-term memory. FTD normally occurs in one's 50s and 60s. The life expectancy is somewhere between 2 and 20 years after diagnosis, with an average of 7 to 10 years. I've always been an outlier, so I'm hoping to be an outlier on the long side of 20, but who knows? For many of us with early onset dementia, that is under the age of 65, the first signs and symptoms are so gradual that we and those around us hardly notice them and think that we're just stressed or tired or depressed. Thus, a diagnosis, while utterly devastating, is also a relief in that we no longer feel like we're going crazy. We actually have a reason for our confusion, exhaustion, inertia, memory loss, aphasia or word loss, and our problems with sight, hearing, and balance. And we realize that this is not normal aging. For people living with dementia, every day is a struggle. While I might not show it, in the words of Christine Bryden, the author of a wonderful book entitled Dancing with Dementia, I feel like a swan gliding above and paddling frantically beneath. You might not think so, but I am no longer a can-do person. I spend a lot of energy maintaining normalcy. My reaction time is much slower than it used to be. I'm becoming clumsy, and I have to watch carefully where I walk so that I don't trip and fall. My short-term memory is very unreliable. I can't look up a phone number and hold on to it long enough to dial the phone. It often takes me 3 or 4 times as I get increasingly frustrated. I also repeat questions and then quickly forget the answers and sometimes the questions. Reading is difficult. I can't recall what I just read, and so I lose track of the text. And writing is even harder as I wrestle with vocabulary and sentence structure. Having one-on-one conversations can be challenging as I struggle to hold up my end, and participating in group discussions is even more problematic. In meetings and at dinner parties, I sometimes feel like E.F. Hutton. When I finally decide to speak, people have to patiently wait and lean in to hear what I have to say. Like some of you, I sunset, getting more tired as evening approaches. By the end of the day, I often don't have anything left in me, especially words, so I crawl into bed and watch TV. I watch a lot of television these days. And not too long ago, I realized it was because with TV, I can be engaged with a community that doesn't demand my verbal response, my memory, or active engagement. I can't find things. I need lots of clues, like the reminder list on the bathroom mirror that I keep meaning but forgetting to put on the mirror, so that I will remember to brush my teeth, take my medicine, and yes, Emily, put in my hearing aids. I can't handle background noise or background vision because my brain gets scrambled. I get tentative and teary. I have a hard time making decisions because I get confused, overwhelmed, and fearful of making the wrong selection. Many days I can't even decide what to wear or eat or do. I've limited my number of activities during the day so that I have enough energy to get through the day and enough words to get through the day. I've organized my closet so that I only see a limited number of items. When going out to a restaurant, Emily and I now look at the menu in advance so I can slowly decide what I will eat. And when getting there, we have to ask for a quiet table. And soon I fear that I will become an early bird, something I really dread. I am frequently anxious. afraid that I will forget something important, and these days I'm having strange anxiety dreams. However, in my research, I've learned that anxiety is an undercurrent of this disease, and people with dementia often live on the edge of panic. I have a buzzing in the back of my head. Actually, they tell me it's tinnitus, which I didn't notice much before, but now as my world becomes more quiet, I hear it all the time. And my brain often feels cloudy or full. It's really hard to explain. To make a long story short, my brain is tired all of the time. And so often I want and I need to retreat. And I know that over time, it will only get worse. Although I'm in the early stage of this disease, last fall I realized that I could no longer keep up with the demands of my position and my standards of job performance. I wanted to step down before I embarrassed myself in the cathedral. I also wanted some quality time with Emily before she became a caregiver and I became a care recipient. I wanted to travel and write and explore my bucket list and live the fullest life I could as long as I could live it. I have watched too many people, and you know them, and some of them are you, or ones you love, hide dementia, as if it's something to be ashamed of or embarrassed about, as if it's a weakness, a punishment, or maybe, depending on your theology, even a sin. If only she had eaten less red meat and more green vegetables. If only he had done the New York Times crossword puzzle every morning. If only she had practiced yoga or meditation for the past 10 years. If only he had followed the advice of the brain wizards on public television. Right? I liken dementia to AIDS in the 1980s. It was something to be denied, hidden, and spoken of in hushed voices. I can still remember my frustration when my doctor's assistant couldn't understand why I didn't just tell my congregation that I was retiring for personal reasons. In the ministry, by the way, that's code for you're in big trouble. I don't want to live with dementia on those terms. I believe, and listen to me, I really mean this. If there's one thing I can leave you with, I believe that denial isn't useful. Honesty is important. Early diagnosis can result in a higher quality of life. And transparency makes life easier for everybody involved. So I decided to model it myself. Like my new friend Greg O'Brien, who's a journalist with early onset Alzheimer's. I want to be a torchbearer who curses the darkness of dementia and lights the path of grace-filled living with this disease. Dementia, as you know, is an umbrella term for a large group of illnesses such as Alzheimer's or Lewy body syndrome or vascular or alcohol or AIDS-related dementia. And although dementia mainly affects older people, hate to tell you this, but 1 in 4 people over 85 have or will have some form of dementia. It is not a normal part of aging. And it can happen to anybody, even though it's in their 20s. According to the World Health Organization, around 47 million people on the globe have dementia. And there are 9.9 million new cases every year. Dementia doesn't seem to care about race, creed, income, or education. It truly doesn't discriminate, but access to quality care does. Did you know that in 2015, the total global societal cost of dementia was estimated by the World Health Organization to be $818 billion a year? That's about 1% of the worldwide gross domestic product. I think dementia is a growing and expensive global health issue. As we baby boomers age, we're going to see more and more and more of it, so we had better deal with it. As a pastor and theologian, I've been trying to make sense of my disease in light of my faith, trying to give it meaning. I've been asking myself a number of questions like, where is the grace of God in all of this? What are the gifts of this disease? What's the teaching and wisdom from a life with dementia? And I want to share today with you all what I'm calling the lessons of dementia from the inside out. The first lesson is the way of the child. There are 10 of them. Do you remember the movie regarding Henry with Harrison Ford? It was about a guy who was a very high-powered finance person on Wall Street, and he went out to get a pack of cigarettes one night in the Upper East Side, and he got shot in the head, and he had to recover from a terrible tragedy, right? Well, that's what I feel like most days. I'm in this aging adult body with the mind and spirit that is becoming younger, so that I'm starting to see life through the eyes of a child. Right now, I feel like I'm 10 or so. I ride my bike with new enthusiasm, sometimes pretending like I'm on a horse. I explore tidal basins with the curiosity of a kid. My taste buds are reverting to the comfort foods of my youth. I've started playing jacks because it's fun and it's good for my hand-eye coordination. I laugh at silly bathroom jokes. I cry at the drop of a dime. And there are times when I reach for Emily's hand, not like a partner, but like a child with her parent. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, unless you become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." In spite of, or perhaps because of my dementia, I'm starting to experience the divine in new and wonderful ways. And I'm feeling most days like I'm living in the kingdom of heaven. The second lesson, I call it no longer the captain. Jesus said to one of his disciples, "Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." I'm learning this lesson firsthand. Thanks to the generosity of some friends, we had use of a sailboat this past summer, a Rhodes 19. And although I've sailed since childhood, it's harder now than before. There are a lot of things to remember and do all at the same time on a sailboat. And as skipper of the boat, one has to be able to set the course, give direction to the crew, and maintain composure in rough seas. And one day when I was sailing, I thought to myself, there will soon come a time when I won't be able to skipper a boat. I will go from captain to first mate, passenger, and eventually to observer from shore. One of the realities of dementia is that your world gets smaller and more confined. I'm still able to drive, but I know that in due time, probably sooner than I wish, I will have to give up that source of independence. Emily has put tile magnets and identity cards on nearly everything I carry so she can find those things when I lose them. And eventually I know I will have to wear an identity bracelet for when I get lost. And while I want to stay home for as long as possible, there might just come a time when it will be burdensome to Emily, and I will move into Judson's memory unit. Kendra, are you listening? I just hope I won't have to wear an ankle monitor with one of those noisy alarms that go off when you roam. As hard as it is to no longer be in control of my life, there's also a newfound freedom in not being in charge. And that's a gift that I'm learning to receive. Now, as an aside, I want to urge you today, to get your financial and legal house in order if you haven't already done so. And if you have done so, to review your advance directives and put in writing what you want as clearly and as fully and as specifically as you can, and share those with whom you share a life. It's really important to be specific so that others can honor your wishes when you are no longer able to communicate them. My third lesson I call crossing to the other side. As Cindy said, for a number of years my mom lived at Judson Park, first in independent living and then in Rheinberger in the memory unit. While she was still in her apartment, I would ask, "What did you do today?" And she would frequently answer, "I went to visit someone on the other side." I soon figured out that the other side was code for Rheinberger and Bruning. And I would respond, "Well, that's nice of you." And she would reply, "Well, I have friends there, and it's good to see how the other half lives." I always took this to mean that someday she too would cross to the other side. And when she did, I both crossed with her and I bid farewell from a distant shore. I suppose that's why they call dementia the long goodbye. The disease creeps up on you as it takes over both your mind and your body. One day, Mom knew what was happening to her, and then she didn't. And that's the nature of advanced dementia. And I wonder if that's what will happen to me as well. What I'm learning now is that when we make such a crossing, when we're no longer able to avoid difficult transitions and circumstances, we are challenged to change ourselves. And the decision to change ourselves might just be what saves us in the storms that are almost inevitable with any great crossing. For in the decision to change ourselves, we turn inward. And in that turning inward, we meet our true selves and we meet the ground of our being. Our Jewish brothers and sisters are celebrating Rosh Hashanah today. They learned this lesson in the Holocaust as the true strength of a person's character came out when they took away his or her name and gave them a number, took away their freedom, their clothes, even their hair and their teeth, but they couldn't take away their spirit. That's something that you and I can hold on to until the day we die. So my fourth lesson is losing life and finding it anew. One of the common teachings of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism, as well as 12-step spirituality, is in dying to oneself and being reborn, or losing life and finding it anew. The wisdom teacher Richard Rohr calls this process of shredding falling upward into the second half of life. Following the steps of Carl Jung, Rohr explains that the first half of life is about the container. And the task of the first half of life is to build and fill the container of success, the container of family, of marriage, of jobs, of careers, of stuff. The second half of life is what happens when the contents are spilled out. And the container is refilled so that in simplicity and naivete, with all of its contradiction and all of its paradox, with all of its pain and mistakes, it's held in what Rohr calls luminas gravitas, a bright sadness. The second half of life, the one that comes after we've died to our old self, is like a sacred dance when we become who we are really meant to be. I have no doubt that I am losing the life that I've always known, but I am certain that I'm finding a new one. I'm falling upward with dementia. And when I fight or deny the reality of the disease, I get myself all tied up in knots. But when I accept it, not wallow in it, but just claim it as real, I start finding new balance and new ways of being in the world that are quite liberating. I just spent some time up on the first floor of Crane House with all of my sisters who also are living with thinking problems. And I appreciated them in a very different way today than I ever have before. And I found myself enjoying their company in ways that I never thought would be possible. You see, I'm discovering freedom. The freedom to let go of pretense and pettiness and pride, and the freedom to just live in the moment. And as I've witnessed in so many people living with dementia, and now see in my own life, there are amazing opportunities to be had in this journey if we are willing and if we are allowed to claim them. Which leads me to lesson number 5. Be the soul of the place you are standing. I'm trying to turn my disease not only into a journey, but also a pilgrimage. What Episcopal priest Gil Stafford has called wisdom walking, wandering with a purpose. As I navigate the distance between my outer reality and my inner world. I'm trying to see dementia as an adventure in learning and spiritual growth. My own elder hostel, if you will. As my cognitive abilities decline, I truly think my spiritual depth and wisdom increases. You know, I served this little summer chapel out in Wellfleet, Massachusetts, and it's filled with clergy families and retired clergy. And the dean of my seminary is a member of the congregation. He came up to me, and I think he was giving me a compliment. He said, "You know, I like your preaching better with dementia than before." Do you remember Dante's The Divine Comedy? You read it in high school or college. It's wasted on young people. The early 14th century poet writing in exile opens with these words. "In the middle of the journey of my life, I came to myself in a dark wood wherein the direct way was lost. It is a hard thing to speak of how wild, harsh, and impenetrable that wood was, so that thinking of it recreates the fear. It is scarcely less bitter than death. But in order to tell of the good I found there, I must tell of the other things I saw there." And then Dante takes us on an excruciating tour of inferno, purgatory, and paradise. And in his final vision, Dante sees what he calls the beam of the highest light. And he emerges from what he calls the dark wood wherein the direct way was lost to the dazzling light of supreme love and truth. These days I feel a little like Dante, a stranger in a very strange land. And as I walk this new path, I'm trying to follow the advice that I saw on a handmade sign as we walk the Camino de Santiago. It's a very wise saying by a Sufi mystic and poet, Rumi. Be the soul of the place you are standing. Be the soul of the place you are standing. I'm determined to live with this disease as a companion on this chapter of my life's pilgrimage and be, as best as I am able, the soul of the place on which I stand. A key element of my way is learning to be here now. As I said earlier, anxiety is a daily companion for people living with dementia. It just is. The doctors had me on anxiety medication for a while, basically to get me through the 3 months from my diagnosis to retirement. And when I retired, with my doctor's knowledge, I decided to go off of the medication and try to manage my anxiety through the practice of mindfulness, which for me includes meditation, yoga, prayer, writing, music, gardening, walking, riding my bike, expressing gratitude, and trying to be attentive and present to the moment. If I'm washing the dishes, just trying to wash the dishes. I'm learning that the spiritual practice of mindfulness is essential to my well-being. It actually works, my friends. I also know that I'm getting to a point where I might have to succumb to medication, and I'll be the first to participate in a clinical trial or therapy that might lead to a reversal or slowing down or even a cure for FTD. But in the meantime, Emily and I are learning how to live fully with dementia as our daily dancing partner. Sometimes it's awful, sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's mundane. I'm sure for Emily, sometimes it's very frustrating, but also sometimes it's funny and even romantic. Doctor's appointments, they've become a part of our regular schedule. And I'm not allowed to go to the doctor, especially the neurologist, without Emily. So we've made doctor dates. After we see the doctor, we go out to lunch or shopping or to a movie or for a walk in the park. And it's our way of turning these lemons into lemonade. And it's also a really great way to keep the romance alive as we become care partners on this chapter of our marriage. My sixth lesson is the truth will set you free. Have you ever had the experience of not being believed? Denial is a very common reaction to extraordinary news. Do we believe the child who whispers the pain of abuse? The employee who brings forth the charges of harassment? The immigrant who pleads for refugee status? Or the parents who say their arrested teenage son is really a good boy? We often miss the truth because we can't or we refuse to believe the messenger and or the message. When I was a college student, I witnessed a bank robbery and nobody believed me. When I was a seminarian, I met God in a McDonald's, and I'm pretty sure that few people believed me. When I tell people that I have early onset dementia, they don't believe me. In fact, I don't believe me either. Some days I feel like my old self and I question the diagnosis. But then something will happen, usually by evening, to remind me that yes, I really have this early stage dementia. What I'm learning is that this is a common challenge for people with early onset. Because it's such a devastating diagnosis, those around us want to comfort us by denying it and saying, oh, we all forget things, or we all get confused. We all can't recall our best friend's name or the day of the week. I'm here to ask you, on behalf of everybody who has this thinking problem, don't do that. Don't tell someone that their reality seems to be an idle tale. It's not comforting. It's actually hurtful and harmful, for it makes us wonder if we're crazy. And moreover, it's all about stereotyping. That a person with dementia is someone who is helpless, unable to think, move, and communicate with others. Someone who's drooling and is incontinent and eats baby food and walks around moaning and groaning. And not all of us are that way. As I said earlier, I believe that early diagnosis is helpful, that honesty is important, that transparency makes life easier for everybody involved. In other words, the truth will set us free to explore the fullness of life within it. My seventh lesson is called Don't Worry, Be Happy. 1988, Bobby McFerrin wrote a #1 hit entitled Don't Worry, Be Happy. And whether he knew it or not, this amazing singer-songwriter was full of some important insights about the detrimental impact that worrying has on our well-being. As McFerrin sings, in every life we have some trouble. When you worry, you make it double. That's probably why Jesus reminded his disciples, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. I'm discovering that since I can't return to or always remember the past, and since I can't predict and control the future, I have to live in the present. And when I live in the present, when I don't regret the past or worry about the future, I'm pretty happy. In some ways, happier than I've ever been before. Maybe my definition of happiness is changing. Maybe the freedom from worry is the source of my happiness. And when something throws me into what I call a dementia moment, or when a dementia moment throws me off course, I'm learning to remind myself of McFerrin's words, not to worry, it will soon pass. And when in the moment, in the panic of the moment, I can't remember that wisdom, it really helps if others gently remind me. My 8th lesson is called Surprising Gifts. The early Christian apostle Paul wrote, there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit, varieties of activities, but the same God who activates all of them in everyone. Too many people with dementia just give up and think, I can't do anything. But that's not true. There are lots of activities that are deep inside of me, like what I'm doing right now, preaching, teaching, leading worship, even chairing a board meeting. I have a feeling that I will be able to do these things, perhaps with modification. I'm very dependent on my text now. But I'm going to be able to do them for some time to come because they're very well practiced. They've become second nature. They draw on some of my innate gifts. And when I can't do these things, okay, I'll accept that and do what I can. I've read about writers becoming potters, physicists becoming pianists, and CEOs who become gardeners. Who knows what I'll be on my own journey of dementia. I'm receiving lots of surprising gifts on this pilgrimage, most importantly, the gift of vulnerability. The ability to just be myself, to let go of things I can't do, to ask for help, and to accept the help that is offered. As I enter my own world with this disease, I'm learning to accept this gift of vulnerability. And I'm praying that it won't abandon me, perhaps even to the dreaded memory unit. So today I want to say to you, when you're dealing with someone who has dementia, it's important to encourage their gifts, to acknowledge their challenges, and maybe to help them explore some new gifts and activities along the way. But you can't do that if you don't see them. One of the things I learned when my mom got dementia and moved to Rheinberger, a lot of her friends couldn't come up there and see her. It was too scary. It was too hard. It was too painful. But it's not contagious. So to those of you who live here, go visit Crane House. To those of you who live Judson Park, go up to Rheinberger. To those of you who live at Judson Manor, go down to the 2nd floor. Or drive over to Rheinberger. These people really need you to be there for them in this time in their life. My 9th lesson, we're coming to the end, is that good things come in threes. I have what's called primary progressive aphasia. That is the loss of language. As I've already said, it's getting hard for me to speak spontaneously in conversation, especially in the evening, in busy environments, talking with more than one person, and when I feel pressured. You don't want to hear me try to deal with a bill collector on the telephone. A child psychologist explained to me that language is a 3-step process that we don't think about very often. First, we have to decide what we want to communicate. Then we have to recall how to say or write it. And third, we have to do it. And most of us take this process for granted. But when you're forgetting how to speak and write, it is exhausting. So that by the time you get to the 3rd step, you sometimes want to give up, or the conversation has moved on. I keep saying to Emily, I wish I could just communicate from my brain to her without having to make it come through my voice. I'm coming to realize that nearly everything we do is a 3-step process of deciding what it is we're going to do, how to do it, and then doing it. And for most adults, this comes naturally, so naturally that we deceive ourselves into believing that we can do several things at once, that we can drive, listen to the radio, admire the view, talk on the phone, and follow directions. But brain scientists will tell you that there really is no such thing as multitasking. We just do a lot of stuff really fast. And so for people living with dementia, we can only do one thing at a time. And that gets increasingly difficult as we desperately try to recall and execute the steps of the dance with as much grace as possible. So when I try to cook, following the recipe and trying to do all the things that have to be done, it's really confusing these days. And not too long ago, I was able to cook and have the phone going and watch the news and have a conversation with somebody. I can't do that anymore. So when you're dealing with someone who has dementia, consider it an exercise in patience. Allow us the time to speak. Help us if we're really clearly struggling. And if you're uncomfortable saying, do you mind if I help you? Recognize that we might have to outline, maybe even out loud, what we're going to do before we do it. We might even have to say it as we're doing it. Okay, now I'm going to brush my teeth, and now I'm going to put the hearing aids in my ear, and now I'm going to take my medicine. And realize that with the more complicated stuff, we might not even be able to make it through all 3 of those steps. Lastly, lesson number 10, my big red balloon. I often imagine life with God as being enveloped in this great, big, very elastic balloon, like the red balloon in that wonderful movie of my childhood. And if you poke the balloon with a pin, I can feel the pinprick. And if you strike it with a knife, I can be hurt. And if you hit it hard enough, I can even be killed. But no matter what is done to the balloon, it will not break. For the elasticity of the balloon simply will not give out. And I'm convinced, therefore, that nothing can separate me from the unexplainable source of energy that gives me life and will be with me even to the grave. And if my big red balloon is a crutch, so to speak, then I'm leaning on it and I'm living in it. Am I frightened of this disease? Sure. I'm afraid of becoming a burden to Emily. I'm afraid of losing language altogether and living in silence and isolation. I'm afraid of being abandoned by my friends, even though they've assured me that they will come and sit with me when I can't talk. And when I allow myself to go there, I'm afraid of not being able to live and die with dignity. And my hunch is that's a fear that many of us in this room share. Naturally, I don't want to suffer or waste away as I die, but I'm not afraid of death. I really do believe that death is the gateway to eternal life. And frankly, though I don't want to rush it, I'm curious about eternity. At present, my daily prayer is, as it's always been, to have a clean heart and a right spirit so that I might live and die with grace. So that's what I'm learning. I'm grateful to have this opportunity to share these new life lessons with you. I hope they're helpful. I encourage you to talk with one another about them, and you'll come up with your own life lessons, and I'm interested in hearing back from you. But for now, thank you for having me here, and we have time for a few questions, so let's get started. Thank you. So before we do the questions, I just want to remind you that responding to things is harder for me. And in fact, depending on the question, I might ask Emily, will you just come up here? And there might be a question that you'll answer as opposed to me. Yeah.
It's not a question. I want to thank you for sharing this with us. I want to thank you for sharing your experience and your perceptions with us. It's a very special gift, and I thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm joking a bit as I say this is my kind of my debut. I've come out a few times. I don't know how many more times I have to come out in life. But I'm hoping we're going to Europe in the beginning of October for the fall, trying to stay out of the way while Trinity calls a new dean, and hoping preaching throughout the Episcopal churches of Europe. And when we come back, I'm going to be doing the same thing all over North America. And I'm willing to go and talk anywhere I can talk about this, because I just really believe that it's a really important conversation. So thank you for encouraging that. And if you know any places where you think I should go talk, places maybe where you've lived before or whatever, make the introduction. Questions? No questions? No thoughts? Wow. David Crampton, you know something about this. This is my good friend David Crampton, one of Case Western Reserve's finest professors.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Son of Stuart also and Susan Crampton. Sorry, I need to say that.
So after I had my stroke, you said you should read Falling Upward. And so I'm trying to read this book. And Tracy told me to read this book, so it must be really important. And honestly, I had trouble figuring out why you recommend this book, because it's for old people. So now, I think based on what you said today, I think you want to say Falling Upward is actually fun. The problem is it comes with anxiety. So it doesn't feel like it's much fun a lot of the time. But basically, this I don't know, the rhythm of life or something. So I want to thank you for sharing your story and helping me understand why I should be grateful that I'm falling upward right now.
Thanks, David. Yeah, we have a question over here. We're using the mics because we're videotaping this, and I'm going to repeat your questions, but basically my friend David, who had a stroke at far too young an age while out jogging, is falling upward, and even his goatee shows it.
I was just wondering if the stimulation in your life has anything to do to help to keep the advancement of this disease. I mean, you're so interested in everything you read, you travel, you speak. Does stimulation like this help a person with
Does the stimulation of staying busy and staying active help? I think so. They tell me it does, and so I'm going to keep working at it. What I can tell you is too much stimulation is really hard now. Noisy rooms, crowded rooms, airports are kind of a nightmare. So managed stimulation helps a lot. Thank you. There's a question over here.
Tracy, I live at Judson Park and enjoy gardening. When your mom was there, she used to love to walk, and I would walk with her, and she would come out and see me every day. And I'll never forget her 90th birthday. She had the best birthday party, and I got a piece of her cake. She was a great lady, and it was fun. We enjoyed having her. She would enjoy seeing people. People would stop and talk with her. She walked the halls all day long, and it was just fabulous.
She did, which is why I'm very nervous about those little ankle bracelets, because they had to put one on my mom because she was walking a little too much. But I think I'm very grateful for my mom, and I'm not particularly grateful for the legacy that her side of the family seems to have left when it comes to cognitive health. But one of the things I do know from having watched my mom and a number of other people is that the real core of who you are doesn't die. My mom had her social graces until the day she took her last breath. And being with you in your garden was a big part of it, so thank you so much.
Then I have another thought. You're blessed and have the opportunity to take a trip abroad shortly.
Yes.
I wish you a wonderful trip, and I'm sure that you'll have a great time. How will you prepare yourself for this trip?
So we're going to Paris. This got conceived on Easter. We spent Easter we took a repositioning cruise. I don't know if you've ever heard of those. They have to move the cruise ships from one hemisphere to the other, and they don't like to do them empty, so you can go really cheap. So for $699 each, which was cheaper than an airfare to Paris, we traveled across the Atlantic, and I slept a good part of it. But I realized we really did reposition our lives. And we got to Paris, where one of my dearest friends is the dean of the American Cathedral, and our rent was to cook Easter dinner, which was pretty weird for me to be cooking Easter dinner as opposed to preaching the Easter sermon. But at Easter dinner, my friend, the dean of the cathedral, and my friend, the Bishop of Europe, said, "Why don't you come here and live for the fall and preach and teach in my church, our churches?" So we'll be going to Paris. We'll be based in Paris, living at the American Cathedral, and then preaching in Brussels, Geneva, Munich, Florence, Rome. And how are we preparing? I don't know. How are we preparing, Emily?
I guess I have to do this.
Figuring out what we're going to wear is very complicated.
So I think one of the things about this new journey that Tracey and I are on, a journey of life, is I am now the chief operating officer of our life, and so I'm in charge of logistics. So Tracey's doing
Don't keep banging on
the
this.
song, and I'm making sure that we get there. And so I'm preparing by figuring out how we're going to get from Paris to Geneva to Florence to Rome.
And I'm trying to write a lot of sermons and get this talk ready and do a couple retreats on the subject. So thanks for asking. Yeah, any other? Yes, ma'am.
Well, you've been talking about early onset, and I wonder, because when you're over 80 and beyond, if you're over 80 and beyond, how much does a person's personality play into this whole process? I mean, how do you know whether it's just being the grumpy old person or whether it's denial or...
Well, I think a couple of things that I would say about it, and then Tina, my friend Tina here from Comfort Matters, maybe she wants to come up and say a word as well. But I think some of the aspects of your personality gets exaggerated with dementia. And I think that happens at whatever age you're at. And Tina, can you help?
I can.
Okay, that'd be great. See, I'm learning to ask for help.
And what an honor just to stand here with you today. Wow. You know, often we know internally when we're not maybe as sharp as we once were. Tracey said, you know, I looked in the mirror and I suddenly didn't recognize myself. Sometimes we just have to ask the question, if we see it in someone else, is it time to go and see the doctor and find out what might be different?
I think that's a really helpful way of putting it. And the other thing is your loved ones can help. Your friends can help. If you all here at Judson can create an environment, you are a community. And in many ways you are family now. Your children aren't always close by. Some of you don't have children. You are a community that cares for one another. And if you're willing to be vulnerable with each other and say, you know, Susie, I'm a little concerned that, you know, you keep forgetting what day it is, or you're wandering a lot, you know, maybe you need to take a look at this. If you can do that with one another with love, I think you'll help each other. Thanks. Yes, ma'am. Good friends from Judson Manor here. You all have to decide when we're done, because I think the energy of conversation could go on, so somebody else is timekeeper.
Thank you. You had mentioned what people should not say to those who are
Yeah.
experiencing dementia. And I wondered if you had some advice for us, what sort of things we can do to make people feel better.
I think it's affirmation. I think it's different in the early stages and the later stages. As the staff here is learning, you know, a lot about the later stages are just loving on them, you know, giving them candy and hugging them and making them feel like they have a sense of dignity and respecting who they once were. As people become less verbal, I think sometimes it can be helpful to say, to ask the question, how can I be supportive of you on this journey? And people at my stage can begin to name that. I mean, for me, the most helpful thing is for people to not tell me I'm crazy, because I already know I'm crazy, you know? I don't know. Any thoughts? Anybody in the room want to add of what are some of the good things to say? I think it's reassuring people. It's saying, maybe, are you looking for this word? Is this the word you were trying to remember? If you see somebody, they look lost, say, hey, can I walk with you? Where are you going? You know, maybe one of the things that Emily does for me, I have a really hard time ordering off a menu. God, it's just impossible. And what Emily does for me is she helps me eliminate what I don't want to eat. And then we narrow it down so I can make a choice. Or maybe if they got to go shopping, it should go with them and offer to help. I mean, sometimes, you know, one of the things that I've done is sort of shrunk my wardrobe into something manageable, but I couldn't do it without the help of friends. And I've reached out and asked for help. And encouraging people to say it's okay to ask for help. And sometimes it's asking them to help you with something that you think they can do. Will you go with me to this place? Yeah. You're living with the reality of dementia as your
Yes, that's
beloved.
what I wanted to say.
Please do.
I had a stroke in December from taking care of my husband, and I'm doing much better, which is terrific. But what I want to say to you is everything you've said about you has been an inspiration to me. Because being a caregiver is really difficult, very challenging. And all the things about the gifts you're learning and the things I'm learning as well. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My husband is over in Rhineborough.
I know your husband is over in Rhineborough, and you know I've had some important conversations about caregiving. And one of the things I want to say to caregivers is you got to take care of yourself too. And I say that to Emily. You know, she has to take care of Emily and have a life of her own. And it can't just be all about me, as much as I'd like it to be. But you know, it's wearing. And that's another thing. You can ask your friends to help you. Hey, will you go visit my husband? You know, again, people don't like to go up there, right? You know it, I know it. It's hard to look at. But, you know, to say, would you please go up and see my husband? You know, to set up that kind of rota of visiting. It's to be able to go and sit at the dinner table and have it be okay if they're a little slower or goofier. You know, it's learning in that if you've got a wonderful program going here and the folks from Crane House or Rheinberger come down or the second floor and somebody gets noisy, is to be patient because it could next be you, right? So thank you. And the support groups are really good conversation places. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
This is Pepper.
Oh, Pepper, thank you. I was wondering who you... See, I've known Pepper for a long time, and I've been staring at her all afternoon. Thanks, Pepper.
You're so welcome. I thought you said two really important things that have helped me with my sister and my husband and may help others. Transparency is so important. I think it lets your friends kind of off the hook, so to speak. And I even have given people guidelines when they go to visit my husband. You know, I've kind of said,
Where's your husband?
My husband right now is at O'Neill's in Bay Village in the memory care unit. He's a veteran. And so I've given them all these little tips, like just 3 or 4.
Like, what
things
are
to
they?
do. Well, one, I say meet him where he is.
Meet him where he is.
You know, just enjoy the space that you all are in together. Know that he is so happy to see you and to remember things from the past, because that's where he is and he's very comfortable. Take a picture, send it to me so we can print it out so that when I go to visit, I can help him recall your enjoyable time together. So we have this big bulletin board, and what I really love is, you know, your friends get a little competitive. You know, they see, oh, George was there, you know. I've been here 3 times, I'm having 3 pictures of you. So it gets to be fun, but I think it's so important to be, like you said, mindful and just be with the person where they are. And I have found a lot of joy in that with my sister, because she can really say some very comical things and have comical notions, but I'm no longer anxious about that. We just laugh, have a
Yeah.
good time.
I understand your sister's making the transition, the crossing, and I'm not supposed to be making pastoral visits since I'm retired, but I'm going to go see her. It's just one more person with thinking problems, because she is one of my most favorite people in the world and was one of my strongest supporters. So, yeah, thank you, Pepper. That's really helpful. I hope that's helpful to the rest of you.
Tracy, we want to wish you and Emily a safe journey. You have opened up a conversation that I hope when you come back from your 3-month tour, we can invite you back. We
Yep.
can invite you to the manor or the park and have folks from here come there. So we'd love to hear how your trip goes,
Well,
what you've learned.
Thank you, and will you tell Dale that I am taking that guitar with me? Cindy's husband Dale has given me a travel guitar that's indestructible, and it is going with me on all of these journeys, so thank you.
Let's hear it for Tracy. Thank you.